Welcome everybody to another Seasons on Saturday, but in this case, we've made it a Sunday because we've actually got a legendary four-season and producer arranger, Charles Calello, who's prepared to speak to us about his memories and answer some questions in a Q&A regarding his time with Frankie and the Four Seasons during the 60s and the 70s, and if we have time, in the 80s. So, as always, these YouTube sessions are based on the 5-year research I've been doing with Snapper Music, gathering as many released and unreleased tracks by Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons over the decades. And that's coming out on the 2nd of June, and I believe pre-orders are already going out, although I haven't got my copy yet. So today, Charlie, if you could let us know what you think about things we'd like to know. I know a lot of the stuff is in your great book, Another Season, but there's things we talk about and say, well, did this really happen or did that happen? And Anthony and I have put together some questions we'd like to put to you, and the other guys will want to clarify some things too. So over to you, Anthony, and the first question for Charles.
Okay.
Hey, Charlie, I was born in Newark and raised in Belleville, and I know you come from down Neck in Newark, so I don't think anyone probably called you Charles. So if it's okay, I'm going to call you Charlie.
Well, you have to say it like a real Italian. It's
Charlie. Hey, Charlie.
Charlie.
Okay, Charlie.
I have several names: Charles, Charlie, Charlie, which is the Jersey way of saying it.
All right.
But I'll answer to you anything you.
All right. Well, we'll start with the basics. So what is an arranger? What does an arranger do? What exactly are you arranging?
All the music that you hear on a record that musicians play, somebody's got to write it out. And that's what I do. I write all the notes out on a piece of paper, and the musicians look at it and play it. Now, how it starts is usually a songwriter will play a song for me. They will play the song and give me some direction. Sometimes I get no direction. Sometimes I get direction. If they give me direction and they say, I want it to be this style, then I create the style, and then we hire musicians that play the arrangement. So every note that the bass player plays, every note the drummer plays, the guitars, the piano, the trumpets, the sax, whatever it is, that's what an arranger does.
But how do you know, Charlie? How do you know what to choose? And, what instruments?
Well, you see, the answer to that question, I'm still trying to figure out, because every time I open my computer now to write an arrangement, I look at the blank page, the same thing runs through my mind. Where do I start?
Mm-hmm.
But it usually starts with the song. The song will dictate what it needs to be.
Back at the very beginning, Charlie, you met Frankie, who had you doing some arrangements for the Victorians. What happened at that meeting, and how did it go?
Frankie was well known in New Jersey, so he walked into the club one night that I was playing. It was a place called the Venetian off of Bloomfield Avenue. It was only a couple of blocks from where he lived. And he came in because he heard about our band. Now, our band was the Victorians, and in Springsteen's book, he mentions two groups that he modeled his band after. One of them was the Victorians. And I didn't know this. I recorded Springsteen many years later, and I never knew this about it. But the interesting part about it was the reason why we were known is because we were all musicians. Most of the kids that played in taverns and bars during that time did it as a hobby. So we were like basically schooled musicians, and musically we were way above what the average person was able to do. So when he walked in and heard our band, the thing that impressed him was the 4-part harmonies that we were able to sing, the way the arrangements were written so the singer could sound the way he sounds, and also the sound of the band.
And that was down to you and the way you put it together. Yeah.
Well, in the beginning, going back a few years, I started to write arrangements as a result of joining this band, because the first rehearsal I went to, they said they wanted to do an arrangement on Almost Like Being in Love, and they asked me to give them the notes. So as the accordion player, I gave them notes to play, and they played. I got a little piano here. I gave them the notes, and I heard it back, and I said, "Hey, that's pretty good." So we started to do what we called head arrangements. We didn't write anything out. I just gave them the notes.
But how did you know these notes in your head? Is that something you learn, or is it God given?
Well, it's a combination of two things. It's probably more. It was just an accident, and I decided I was going to play something. And I play on, but the intro that I played on the accordion, I just gave them the notes. So whatever I played on the accordion seemed to work, and I heard it back, and I said, "Hey, this is pretty cool. I could tell them play the notes I play on the accordion, and boy, they sound a lot different, but they sound better with the horns."
Right.
So that's basically, I guess how most arrangers start. They sort of, instead of doing the song this way, let's do it this way.
Well, Charlie modestly calls himself an arranger, but Charlie is an arranger orchestrator of the highest degree, because if he writes a part for a triangle, obviously everybody can hit the triangle, but Charlie knows where it goes. And that's the magic. And that's the part that even Charlie is struggling with telling you where it comes from, because it's like channeling. You're sitting there in front of a blank page and things start to occur to you. And then you start to recognize what they are because you've done it before. And before you know it, you end up with the chart to Savannah Band's Tony Mottola, or you end up with My Eyes Adored You. You end up with, matter of fact, on Charlie's credits list on his webpage, it actually just lists the 7 people he didn't work with, and everybody else is his list.
So you were doing this at the time when you were a very young man and you realized you had this skill. And
no, I didn't realize I had a skill.
Oh, well, you just made friends with Frankie because you each liked.
He liked my band, so we became friends.
Right.
And
it wasn't that he said, "Hey, you're a genius. You need to work for me." He just said, in our conversation, he says, "Well, who writes the arrangements?" I said, "Well, I do." He said, and how did you learn this? I said, "Well, I went to Arts High School," and I gave him a little background. I said, "Basically, this is what I hear, and I copy records, and I learned that this is what we do." And he said, "Can you do that for us with the 4 Lovers?" So I said, "To be honest, I really don't know what you sound like." So after spending a couple hours in a car after the gig at the Venetian, Frankie and I made an appointment to meet and he and I started to hang around, and then I went to see his band. And what I recognized about Frankie, when I went to see the band, it was a Monday night, and in Newark there were no bars that were jammed on a Monday night, but the bar he was playing in, it was wall-to-wall people. And when Frankie sang, the audience stopped and they just listened to him. I heard him sing My Mother's Eyes, and I said, "Oh my God." I said, "This guy's brilliant."
Yes, well, that's in your book, and he's talked about that, performing that at that time. So you got to work with him, and you did a record. You actually wrote a song called Come Si Bella.
There was a kid I went to high school with who had cerebral palsy, and we used to have a lot of fun with him because he had a great sense of humor. His name was Carmen De Palma, and he called me up and he said he wrote a song for Frankie Valli. So I listened to it. I said, Carmen, I said, the song's not finished. I said, let me help you fix the song. So I organized the song. I wrote the bridge, helped them put the lyric together, and I brought it to Frankie and Tommy. And because it was an original, Tommy says, let's record it.
But how did you get it released? You were a little known band.
Well, Frankie had contacts, and I really don't remember how we got it released, but Frankie was different. While the guys were working in nightclubs, they also had day jobs. Frankie's job was only the Four Lovers. So during the day, he'd go to New York and he made contacts.
Right.
So he got to meet the songwriters, the producers, and that's how he got the deal with the Four Lovers on RCA in 1954.
Yeah.
So he had contacts. So he made some contacts someplace and got the record released.
But he also did the same thing to meet Crewe, didn't he? He made Crewe that way.
He made arrangements to go into New York just to hang out. And when the first time he took me there, we went to a place called the Turf Restaurant, which is where the musicians and the writers hung out in between sessions. So when I walked in, I sat down at the table with him, and he saw there was King Curtis, who was the saxophone player. He was having lunch. Otis Blackwell came up and said hello to Frankie. He wrote The Apple of My Eye, also several hits for Elvis. And we started to talk to him. And Frankie was introducing me to these people. So his job basically was he worked in the clubs, but during the day he networked in New York.
But he also persuaded you to join the Four Lovers for a spell, didn't he?
Yeah, well, I wanted to go back to school, and the band that I was with was gonna do a road trip around the United States, and I wanted to just stay and go to Manhattan School of Music, which I did for a year, and I also played bass because when I went to the Music and Arts High School, I needed to play an orchestral instrument, so I took the bass.
Yeah.
So because I was a bass player, Tommy's brother, Nicky, not Nick Massey, but his brother Nicky left the band, and Frankie called me and said if I wanted to work with him, he wanted me to come on board. So I joined them, but the problem with the Four Lovers was Tommy didn't want to rehearse. Their musical knowledge was limited, so there were harmonies that they just couldn't do because they couldn't hear them. So it was basically not a productive arrangement, other than the fact that I got a great education about pop music, which I had no knowledge about.
Right, and through that you also got to meet Crewe and work on your first arrangements with Crewe.
Well, that really happened later.
Yeah.
After I left the Four Seasons and went back with my old band.
Yeah.
When I would come home, Frankie had made the contact with Crewe, and they were making records. And Mike Petrillo was writing the arrangements, but he had no knowledge about how to put things together. So he says, "Why don't you get Charlie to do it? Charlie's off the road, so call Charlie." So I came to a meeting with Bob Crewe, and this was about 2 years prior to the Four Seasons.
Yeah.
So with when I met Crewe, and Crewe wanted me to write the arrangement, what he did was he took records and he said, I want trumpets that sound like this. And I want the rhythm to be like this. And he'd play me records. And I want the violins to do this. And then I want these explosions to be like, so he gave me all these ideas, and I had the song An Angel Cried. Yeah. So I went back to my house and I worked the arrangement out. And that was the first arrangement I wrote for Bob Crewe.
Yeah. So it was a natural relationship because he was just giving you the lead into what you wanted to hear, and you were translating it into what was a completed record. Is that right?
Plus he found somebody who was working cheap. You know, I was a kid from New Jersey, and I think Bob paid me to write that arrangement $25.
Yeah, that seems like standard rate to me at the time.
And well, when I wrote the Big Girls Don't Cry arrangements for the album, I got $10 an arrangement. That was
oh my God!
Oh my God!
That was like big money.
Ooh.
But you got a whole album, or most of an album.
Yeah, so like it was $100 back then. $100 paid the rent for the month.
You got called back to do this album after they'd had 2 number ones. That must have been a shock.
Well, not really, because one of the things I learned about Frankie is Frankie likes to keep everything in house. And although Sid Bass worked with them on the first 2 records that they made, Sherry and Big Girls, Sid was a record date arranger, but had no knowledge of what they were doing. The things that they were doing, they were orchestrating things at their level, and which Sid was not able to really understand because he was more musical. And as a result of me getting involved, Gaudio says, you know, Charlie, I want it to be like this. Crewe would say, Charles, I want it like this. And I'd say, okay, and I'd write it out. And in the beginning, basically, I was listening to Gaudio and Crewe and Frankie telling me what it is that they wanted. Then they'd play me records for me to copy. So I created the stuff using like this.
So you were like the artificial intelligence of
exactly. And then when they got stuck, I would fix it.
Yeah. So so when you arrived to do that, you also Anthony and I were talking about this. Anthony, there was a couple of other tracks, wasn't there, that Charlie did? Do you remember, Anthony?
You know, on the Christmas album that followed?
Yeah.
He did tracks on the Christmas album.
Yeah, Little Drummer Boy and Santa Claus Is Coming to Town.
Well,
which was the only single from the record which made the charts. So Bob Crewe figured, yeah, I'm paying Sid Bass $150 for the arrangement. I'm paying Charlie $25 an arrangement. Yeah. And he got the record on the charts, so using him.
It's a favorite in Long Island during Christmas season. Santa Claus Is Coming to Town. We hear it a lot here.
But you said in your book something about you sat with the orchestra and you'd arranged the orchestra, and was that the first time you'd done work with an orchestra as an arranger?
Yeah, that was the first time. That was the first time I was with live musicians in a recording studio, recording with horns, strings, and rhythm section. I'd never done that ever in my life.
So
of course,
that not
of
done
course,
on...
I was 23 years old or 24 years old.
Yeah.
So.
You're like a sort of an older Lee Shapiro.
Well, it was my admiration of Charlie. The more he's talking, I didn't even know Charlie. I'm a Manhattan School of Music dropout as well. And the people that I know who really benefited from Manhattan School of Music all dropped out. Nobody got the sheepskin because they wanted to work. And by the second year, you could do it. You could do it. You started to know what the note on the paper meant in your head.
Well, I'm sure.
I don't know, Charlie, throw out a name that influenced you the way you influenced me when I was 22 doing Who Loves You and you were doing cruise charts. Who were your inspirations?
Well, as a kid, it goes back. Goes back to when I went to high school. When I was around 15 years old, I started to pay attention to my father's record collection. He had Miles Davis. Uh, he had a record called Move, which was arranged by Jerry Mulligan, and he also had some Sinatra records. And then he liked Clifford Brown because my father played trumpet. So he asked me. He said he wished that he could learn how to play those solos. So I started to take dictation off the record, and I wrote out about 3 or 4 solos by Clifford Brown. And my father was surprised that I was able to do that. And from there, I started to listen to Nelson Riddle. I loved Frank Sinatra records. So I started to listen to Frank Sinatra records, and I started to take the dictation off the records. I'd sit there while the kids were out playing baseball and running around, as I'm 15 years old, listening to records, trying to hear the first trumpet part, then listening to see if I could hear the second trumpet part. And then I'd say, okay, well, if they use those 2 parts, then these must be the other 2 notes. And listening to the trombone. So what I was doing was taking dictation. So there was Nelson Riddle, then Don Costa. Don Costa really became my favorite all-time arranger, because one of the things I learned from Don didn't put a note on the paper that didn't fire from his heart. And I realized that if I was ever going to be satisfied with any of the things that I wrote, if I couldn't commit to it, it didn't belong on a paper. So when I took a look at those 2 arrangers, but then there was also numerous other arrangers that I listened to that I loved. I loved Count Basie's band. I loved the Miles Davis records that he did with, I can't even think of their names. But there were so many arrangers that at that level, I was really not aware of the pop arrangers that were making pop records. I never knew there was such a thing as somebody writing arrangements for pop music. So I never listened to pop.
So when you came to do the Big Girls Don't Cry sessions, you were a bit of a novice at pop arrangements, were you? Or had you a number before?
To me, it was childish music.
Right.
I thought that way too. They were the hugest, biggest selling music, much less complicated than jazz, much more purchased than jazz. And I didn't like it because it was silly. 1-6-2-5, dun, 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 dun. And I learned through listening to Charlie's charts that in that simplicity, there was arranging going on. It wasn't.
Well, what happened was, when you listen to the Four Seasons records, Sherry was this. I mean, it wasn't, as opposed to.
Turn your keyboard volume up.
Let me see if I get the volume up. But as opposed to harmonies like.
No sevenths though, only triads.
They didn't know this kind of music. So what fascinated them was I had this understanding of music. This is a cute story. I know you're going to get a kick out of this, Lee. We did Candy Girl. So Candy Girl, the way it was played, it was this chord was a half diminished chord. So I'm rehearsing the band, rehearsing the Four Seasons. So I said it's a 1, a 6, a 2, and then it's a 2 half diminished. So Tommy says, "What do you mean a half diminished? Either it's diminished or it ain't." So I said to him, "Wait a second. Let me see. How can I explain this to you? Oh, it's an A minor 6. Well, why didn't you say so in the first place?" So you had to give them different spellings for them to be able to understand what the notes were.
Now we know why you left in 1966.
He had more. He had more notes to explore.
Yeah,
There wasn't enough.
yeah.
There was no notes left in that gig. He took them all out.
Candy Girl, you wrote the new opening intro, which nobody else could get, according to your book. And you said to me before that you suddenly reached a point where you felt as though you were beginning to influence the sound of the records to a greater extent.
Well, after we cut the tracks, the Four Seasons were on a road, so Crewe and I really finished the records. So Crewe would say, I think we need horns on some of these. So I'd write horns.
Right.
I think I need this. So we would do overdubs. But the first real Charlie Calello Four Season record was Dawn Go Away.
Yeah.
Because Dawn was written like this. Go down. Now it was I did this.
Yeah.
Now that's what the arranger did. Sped the tempo up, added the jun jun jun, and then all these chords. They weren't part of the song, and then also all those chromatic things. That was not in their wheelhouse for them to do. And when Crewe heard the arrangement, just without the song, he came running into the studio. He says, Charles, that's brilliant. I was really even afraid to play it because it was so out of the so far away from what the Four Seasons were doing at that point.
It was, and it created a completely new sound for them compared to what they'd been doing at VJ.
And that's why they gave Charlie that big writer's royalty of that song, the writing royalty. It came to him right away because he
wasn't Frankie opening with wasn't Frankie opening it with Dawn at one time?
I actually got to, I don't want to take away from this moment with Charlie, but I actually got to, when I was 19, create the new opening of the show with Dawn, which I did. He called me on it to do it the day of the first gig, which I did. And we started it with him off stage, pretty as a midsummer morn. They call it Dawn. Then, ladies and gentlemen, Frankie Valli. We never changed it. But a bigger story is the hit, the Bye Bye Baby medley that Charlie did. When I got there, the pages had mustard stains on them. He had done it already. It never changed. I left in 1980. That you could not change the final melody that went into da 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 boom. The entire audience got on their feet every time we did that final medley, and
that has held Frankie Valli's shows together.
It was the best medley of Frankie's music that ever has been. Was that final medley? It was just.
When did that come about, Charlie? When did you say do Bye Bye Baby this way?
Well, what Lee's talking about, they did a medley. They did a hits medley, and there's a technique I learned a long time ago from doing live dates. Humperdinck had me write his closer for many years, and I'd say, Eng, when you get to this point, the audience will start to stand up. And he says, how do you know that? I said, because I'm writing it into the arrangement. The music will tell the audience what they need to know to stand up. So he says, but how do you do that? I said, well, I don't know, but I know it's going to work. That's what Lee's talking about.
Yes.
It's an instinctive part about finding a solution to a musical problem to accomplish something that you wanted to accomplish.
But it steps up and up and up to reach
right.
Yes, and also saving it for last. It would Sherry, Walk Like a Man, Big Girls Don't Cry, all relatively the same tempo into And this is Charlie telling the audience, da, 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 get on your feet, bang, blah, blah. You could never do the beginning of Bye Bye Baby because the way he had it orchestrated into that medley was a home run into the parking lot every show for the 8 years or the 9 years that I was there. It just, and I learned from that when you want to make something, and I learned it also from working with Barry Manilow, who Charlie has worked with, and that is you can exaggerate these pullbacks and these things until they're drooling and then hit it. And that's stuff that you learn only one way, with mentors like that, and by doing it. You got to do it. You got to stand there at sound check and say, "Uh-oh, this isn't working. What am I going to do?" But if you don't jump in that pool, you don't do it. You got to take the chance.
It really stage 2 of Four Seasons career started with Dawn and then carried through 64 and 65. And we've talked about this in our previous sessions as we've been pulling all the albums together for the box set. And
now comes
Ronnie.
No, Let's Hang On. Let's Hang On was the next major change that I made with the group.
Right. But you'd used the same formula that you'd used on Dawn. I think you've said to me became a sort of a formula style that was carried through on the successive on Ronnie.
Ragdoll was what?
And Ragdoll was sort of a variation on that theme. Yeah. But then Let's Hang On, and you've said to me before, and you've written in your book that somebody wanted a Motown feel, and so you knew you couldn't do the Motown sound because they had the equipment, they had different musicians, etc. But you said to me, I think, in trying to imitate that sound, we found something different. Is that right?
Well, that was the thing I learned from Bob right from the beginning. See, one of the advantages that I had is, although everyone knows me as an arranger, my correct title would be I'm a record maker.
Yes, a hit record maker.
I learned how to make hit records. That's what I learned how to do, because I did it. I didn't realize this as I was doing it. I didn't realize that this was a niche that I had fallen into. I didn't recognize that until I was about 65 years old. I just did it because that's what I did. But the fact was that when you hired an arranger would write the arrangement, but a record maker would make a record. And there was a big difference. Each instrument on that record has to play a unique part that becomes indicative of that particular sound. And if you create that, people will copy it. Just like in Swear to God, when I did this. Barry Manilow stole it in Copacabana. Every record that I heard played those chromatic jazz chords.
Yes.
In the progression. It's a question of finding the ingredient that makes the record come alive.
Yeah. So
it becomes a hook. The actual part of the arrangement. It's just like in Sweet Caroline with Neil Diamond. As many people that know Sweet Caroline, that same amount of people know bum, bum, bum.
What was it?
Da, 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 right? But meanwhile, it becomes part of what communicates to the audience. There's somebody who wants to say something. Please say it now.
No, it's okay. There's nothing to say other than we know all the connections. We study this, and anybody who's watching this will learn a lot.
I want to also say something else, that a lot of the early records that we made, I sat with Bob Gaudio, and Bob Gaudio would say, I want the bass to do this, I want the guitar to do this, and I want this rhythm up. And I'd say, okay, Bob, if you did this, then how's about we do this? He says, yeah, I like that. How's about no, not that, but do this. So I learned. Bob was very systematic, and as a result of his systematic way of working, although he couldn't put it on paper, he would almost put those early arrangements together and all I had to do was find the things that made it unstiff. And I know Lee will understand that because Gaudio had a tendency to make things so mechanical that they didn't sound natural. But if you could get him to do what he did and then get it to sound natural, that was a big key. And by having teachers like Crewe, Gaudio, and all of the records that I listened to, I wound up having this potpourri of knowledge that I was able to apply to this simple music that I was making.
Yeah, but then you took another step and went from a arranger to taking control of the whole kit and caboodle and became a producer.
He was doing it. He was doing it anyway, credited or not, as an arranger. I like to call it Charlie's vibes, bells, and chimes era. All of those records that had bells and vibes, Can't Take My Eyes Off You. Well, Kenny Mazza was already, but he copied Charlie because that's what it sounded like. But be that as it may, that era, he was causing hits to be made, or they would have been another. It would have been good. Having Frankie was a plus, and all talented people. But my point being is that none of the other 1-6-2-5 tunes, or even a little more complicated chord like that, had chimes and bells and vibes on it.
Well, but Charlie did this on a song that he'd also arranged years before, An Angel Cried. And
yes.
He comes to do it again, and he does a completely, totally different arrangement.
Application. But let me tell you something. When you hear bang, bang, is there any question what song there is? You could be in Somalia and people will know what song that is before a word is ever sung.
Yeah.
And that's what someone who does what Charlie does as well as he does, that's when a producer starts to have hits like Joel Diamond.
So when
they're more executive producers. Charlie's the producer on those records.
So Charlie, when you redid An Angel Cried, there must have been some plan to do it in the formula and use all the bells and chimes.
Well, at that time, when you take into consideration that Gaudio wrote the song,
yeah,
and he wasn't going to let the song go to waste, so they put it on a Four Seasons album. That Gaudio figured out a way for him to do it vocally, so it would work vocally. So it became its own record. And what we did, most of us that work, and this is probably a reasonably good analogy. Most of us that work that are successful to a degree, we have a toolbox.
Yeah.
And we use our toolbox. Now, what happens is, as you have the toolbox, the longer you're in the craft, you add tools to the toolbox.
Right.
So as we would add the tools to the toolbox, they became part of what made the sound. So having the opportunity to have it heard on the radio made it possible for me not only to build a toolbox, but to have that toolbox become part of the thing that made the Calello sound.
Correct. It's so true. So true.
Toolbox was actually full then by the time you did Native New Yorker with Odyssey.
His toolbox will never be full. He's got ears the size of Vermont. If a mouse farts, he hears it.
Can I ask a question? When you listen to Sherry and Big Girls Don't Cry, do you ever think about what you would have done differently?
Well, when you listen to that record, there was something that was really unique about it that probably most people would not even understand. First of all, the secret behind the success of that song, and I found humor with this. Every person that tried to sing Sherry in Jersey Boys never got what Frankie got out of the song. You listen to him sing the song, he pleaded with Sherry to come out. He sang that like that was the most important thing he could ever say to this girl. And as far as the record was concerned, this they did. They did this with the guitars. Was there a bell? And the other one was. So they were, now this is the Four Seasons did this. But they were, now all of that stuff is on the record. These were the arrangements that they figured out with the guitars. So, and then this, that rhythm became magical. Now that record was perfect. If you were to say make that record better, I couldn't have made that record better if I tried in 100 years. That record was perfect. Big Girls, perfect.
Yeah,
they nailed it. They nailed it, and that's what made them successful. The fact that they had that ingredient.
And I'll tell you something else, the sound that's always missing to me and all of the Jersey Boys tributes and all that stuff, and frankly, that we tried to put back in when I first joined, and then it went into the disco world, which was great. But I always missed the hand claps and the foot stamps. It's part of what made it from the street. It's part of what made it rock and roll instead of, it was its last life of rock and roll that turned into pop, which was wonderful. And it was great stuff. But the hand claps and the foot stamps, that was just it. That nobody did. And then, of course, we started to recognize that as a Crewe signature in Lightning Strikes and songs we did with other people. But when I heard the chunk, 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 I had no idea what it was, but I knew it was making the rhythm happen.
I'll tell you what Crewe actually taught me. And this is sort of like my own little personal joy that I got every time I think about Bob Crewe. He taught me the element of the bizarre. And what I mean by that, I'd play an arrangement I'd be running down the track, and Bob would come running out of the store. Stop! What was that they played? Play that. And he'd hear something, and he'd say, "This is the intro." And I'd say to myself, "Where did he get that from?" And he'd do something, and all of a sudden, he would take something that I would have never thought of and used it. And I said to myself, these are the things that made him the great producer he was. So when you learn lessons like this from a guy like Bob Crewe, foot stomp, who would put foot stomps on a record when you only had 4 tracks? You got to give up an entire track to go and do. But then he'd walk around the studio and tap his foot on the boards to get the right sound. I mean, it was funny to watch.
Well, then he jumps to wonderful solo material like The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore and Can't Take My Eyes Off You. And, Crewe had moved to something else that was not the Four Seasons sound.
No. When we made the Sun Ain't Gonna Shine, the Walker Brothers record is a little faster.
Yeah.
But they copied it really note for note. And it was also on the same label. So I don't think that Smash, which was part of Phillips, really worked the record, because Frankie really should have had the hit on the record.
Yeah, they possibly didn't want it to detract from the Four Seasons success.
Yeah.
But then again, you move forward another 10 years and you've got you and Crewe again doing Swearing to God, which came out of like a bolt of lightning out of the blue.
Well, what was interesting about going back to that era, I wanted to clear up something. Dawn Go Away, when we cut Dawn Go Away, a lot of people aren't aware of this. What Crewe did was he made a deal with Atlantic. Atlantic was supposed to sign the Four Seasons.
Yeah.
And Ahmet Ertegun pressed up 1,000 copies of Dawn on a handshake that he had with Crewe. And then Crewe signed with Phillips. And Ahmed never forgave him for it. And we never worked at Atlantic again. Because after we cut Dawn, I wanted to stay to record there. They had an 8-track machine. But he kicked us out.
If you'd stayed there with 8-track machine, you could have had even more success, you think?
Well,
that's impossible. he couldn't have had more success. He is the barometer. That's what there is. Like I've told Charlie before, Charlie had Don Costa and Nelson Riddle, both of whom I met through Frankie. But I had Charlie Calello to listen to, and he didn't. So I should be pretty much better than you, Charlie, because I had you to listen to.
But not all of the stuff that you did and did wonderfully well with Crewe and even with Gaudio has been heard by people. And we found material that we think you arranged, like a track called Need to Get to Know You, which was a Crewe Gaudio song in 1970. Hardly anybody has ever heard Sandy Lindsay's Where Are My Dreams and the way you arranged that. And then we are told, I think you mentioned in an interview to me, that you also went and helped Gaudio at Motown. You flew to LA.
Yeah.
But can you remember what you helped him with?
I went out there and I did 4 tracks with them, and I didn't remember the songs at all.
But they're all on the Chameleon album, but you haven't got individual credit for any of them.
I can't tell you what the songs were, or I can't even sing you the songs. The only thing I could tell is if I arranged them by listening to the record, because I know the signature.
Well, they all ended up on the Chameleon album. So that album has got you as credited as an arranger, but also Joe Scott. So we don't know which tracks he did and which you did. But
Gaudio likes that. Gaudio likes the ambiguity.
Well, yeah.
Arranged by a couple of guys who don't get royalties.
Yeah. But then you did the Kenny Nolan tracks. My Eyes Adored You.
That's my favorite arrangement ever.
And Hymn to Hair. And this time you were with Lee. So it was 1973, November. Lee was called into the studio to work on Hickory, and I don't know which of the actual sessions.
Charisma.
Here's the interesting part about that is the 4 seasons were really over.
Yeah.
When we cut My Eyes Adored You. As a result of that record, they were able to make a new deal for the 4 seasons on Warner Brothers through Mike Curb.
Yeah.
And without My Eyes Adored You, there would have been no revival of the 4 seasons, because they would not have had a record company. Take into consideration the arena rock bands had taken over from the English bands.
Yeah.
American rock bands in the early 70s were taking off, and nobody wanted pop doo-wop bands from the 60s. It just wasn't happening. As a result of that, Crewe's amazing brilliance with that song, and that record, take into consideration, I hadn't recorded Frankie in about 5 or 6 years. That was the first record I made with them.
Yeah.
And when I made the record, I had no idea that the market had changed, because I had just come back from a sabbatical. So I wrote the arrangement as if I always wrote. I just heard the song. I did what I did. The boom, 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 the introduction and all that other stuff that goes along with making a record. But what was really interesting about it was the first time I heard the record on a radio. I was picking up my cleaning in a cleaners. I had no idea the record was released, because I knew that Motown had canceled it. They didn't like the record. I was in a cleaners and I heard it playing on a little radio. I heard the record and I said, oh my God. I said, that's going to be #1. You could just hear it. The song was brilliant. Frankie was brilliant. And the timing was right. 40-year-old guy talking about his runs into his high school sweetheart. I said, this can't miss. Can't miss.
Yeah, and Lee was involved at the time as well. And
well, what's really one of the most exciting Charlie moments of my career.
Before it was a hit, Lee, weren't you? You were performing it before it was a hit.
We performed it before it was a hit, and the strings that Charlie so masterfully wrote were being played on an ARP string ensemble through a lawnmower, and that was what we thought strings sounded like. But no, the best, I would guess it's the single best Charlie Calello story I have of my life, and that would be he was in with the horn section of Media Sound, as I recall, and I was in the control room with Crewe. Mind you, I'm all of 22 years old, and so all these guys have made hit records, and I'm there, and Charlie's recording the over the rhythm track, and had one of those moments. Crewe was like, "Stop! Somebody rewind tape to the chorus. Somebody write this down." Well, I was the only guy in the room that could notate, so I'm shaking, and he's singing the chorus is going by, and he starts singing "Baubles, Spangles, and Beads," and I write it down, and he says, "Do you got it?" And I showed it to him. Yeah, I'm showing it to him. He's like, he can't read music. He said, "Run it out to Charlie." And I ran it out to Charlie, and I saw him passing a little piece of paper from saxophone player, people like Ernie Watts, people like Chris Lieb, people like the stars of horn sections, and Snooky Young, and we're passing it out, and then all of a sudden, one of the guys switches to clarinet, and it comes out, "Wada, wada." I thought I was going to wet myself. I couldn't believe it. I watched it from an idea of a producer to taking dictation, to handing it to an orchestrator and arranger, to whispering the parts to guys on the session. I'd never seen anything like it in my whole life. I never will forget it for the rest of my life. It was a wizard moment, Charlie, and I thank you for it.
That's great. That's great. Okay, well, that was 1975, and you were going down another path with Who Loves You, which you also had a part together in, didn't you? You and Charlie.
Well, we were going to England or something, and here it is. First of all, just let me pat myself on the back. We did the string chart for Who Loves You. I was shaking in my boots. I had 20 strings in front of me. I don't think that had ever happened before for me. And Gaudio didn't change a note. He didn't change a note. But the big compliment comes, and it came through Gaudio. He said, "Calello was conducting this for you in your absence." And he looked at me and said, "Did I write this?" And the truth of it is, I kind of channeled him, so he sort of did. But
yeah,
but that was the biggest compliment I ever got. Did I write this?
Well, you both got to work together a bit later in the 60s, 70s, didn't you, Lee? Because you worked on the Lady Put the Light Out album to some extent, didn't you?
Charlie did the good parts of that album.
Right. But you co-wrote did you co-write a song on that?
I co-wrote my big debut on songwriting. Well, first of all, was Carrie, which was supposed to be a B-side and ended up being glommed up by the production company, publishing company of Hank and Dave Apple and Hank Metris, which is kind of standard. And so we made a lot of nothing. But then on Frankie, Valli is the Word, I had 3 songs, all co-written by Frankie, because we know how prolific that is. And the other writer was Kevin Tighe from the TV show Emergency with the Firemen. So those are not on my reel, but but Charlie did some of that out. Like I told you, Charlie did the good parts, the parts I listened to.
You didn't do much. You didn't do much work after that, except coming. It always seems that Bob Gaudio sort of rang you and or Frankie rang you and said, "Charlie, can you help out on this? Or we've got a bit of a problem." Like the Reunited Live album, which
because I wasn't there. There wasn't a reader in the group. Nobody could put. Charlie would have been out there singing things to people to this day.
What happened with that record was very interesting. This was back in the late 70s.
Yeah, it was 79, 80.
I got a call from Frankie, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I really don't have too much going on." He said, "I need you to come out here." So I said, "What's up?" He says, "No, just come out." So I jumped on a plane. I flew out to California. I went to his house, and I stayed with him for a week.
Right.
And I got there, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Mary Ann left me." And also, he said, "Celia, I don't know if you know." He
Yeah.
said, "Celia died." He
Yeah.
said she fell off. She was trying to get into her house. She fell off the back. He says, and I'm just not doing well. He said, "So I'm glad you came out." Now, while I was there, Gaudio was starting to plan the live record. So he says, "I got to go to this rehearsal." He says, "Why don't you come with me?" So I got there, and Gaudio was trying to put the songs together from the original arrangements. And I just sat and watched it, and he was doing certain things. I said, "Bob," I said, if I may, you need to do this." "Oh, okay." And so I started to fix the things, and Frankie says, "What? Why don't you stay here and fix this with us, and help us put this together?" So it wasn't like I really wanted to stay there and do that record. I had a contract with it, and Lee, you'll love this. I never got a royalty statement.
Of course not.
Nor did I ever get a check for being a Four Seasons and singing on Working My Way Back to You.
Right? You get the honor of the client. That's it on your resume.
But what was funny about it, I enjoyed it for one reason, because I just met Clay, and it gave me an opportunity to stay in California, and we eventually got married. So I hold that as a plus spot in my relationship with Frankie.
And then you didn't work again with again until the Street Fighter album, and that
another dud. What a dud.
We had a hit record. But we made a synth record. Sandy and I made this record. He wrote a song called Veronica.
Yeah.
It was amazing. But when we finished the record, trying to put real people, it just turned out to be a mishmash. But the original track we made with the synths could have been a hit for Frankie.
Right.
I think it was already a hit, and it was called Gloria by Laura Branigan.
Veronica, Gloria.
Veronica. No, it's only so many notes. I would defend Sandy and Charlie all day long. I would. It doesn't matter what I think.
Yeah. So we suffered as fans throughout this period with little or no records coming out, whereas other artists were bringing out maybe, classic artists from the 60s and 70s bringing out 2 or 3 a year. But there seemed to be no record deals. And then Jersey Boys hits. And then because of the pushing to get the Motown stuff out, Frankie does a deal on Romancing the 60s. And so everybody comes back together. So what was?
But here's one of the things that nobody really understands. If you analyze what was the success of the Four Seasons, there were actually 6 people involved.
Yeah.
6 people. There was Bob Crewe, Bob Gaudio, Frankie Valli, Sandy Linzer, Denny Randall, and me. Yeah. As you started to take people away from the equation, the thing that dried up were the songs.
Yeah.
When they didn't have the songs, when somebody says, "How do you make a hit record?" I tell them that you need 3 ingredients. You need the song, and the song. That's just, if you have a great song, most people could have a hit with a great song. But the fact is, Gaudio got to the point where, and this is indicative of many, many writers, where you speak the language for only a short period of time. The pop audience is an audience that fits in this slot, and it keeps moving like this, because every year new people come in, new people are born, and that's the music that stays with you the rest of your life. You're a Four Seasons fan because you were in that slot and you followed it all through your life. Now, when Gaudio had control all by himself, what was missing? The 5 spokes that kept the wheel together.
Yeah.
Or 3 of them, or 2 of them. He
Well,
wasn't
it's
writing through.
like
He
pillars.
wasn't writing
I was
through.
in construction, so it's like pillars supporting a building.
But you look at it this way. What made the wheel operate, we were spokes in the wheel. When Crewe and Gaudio didn't have it, I had it. When I didn't have it, Sandy and Denny had it. But there was always somebody that was supporting the nucleus to keep it going. The reason why, right after they went to California and Frankie had the slew of hits and Bob had those 2 hit records, Bob dried up. He
Right.
dried up. He never wrote another song. Now, one of the things that was really good about Gaudio, he didn't hit the ball all the time. But when he hit it out of the park.
Yeah.
Sherry, Big Girls, Walk Like a Man, Ragdoll.
Yeah.
Can't Take My Eyes Off You. December 63.
Under My
Who
Skin.
Loves You?
Under My Skin, yeah.
I've Got You Under My Skin. He put that together.
Amazing.
So when he did it, he did hit it out of the park. But the fact is that in between those periods, he had those other people to act as a catalyst.
Yeah.
I'm still making hit records during that period of time. So I was still talking to the public.
Yeah, it's about that, getting that connection. But you
I
found
was in California 12 years. I saw Gaudio maybe half a dozen times.
Yeah.
Gaudio was only a good collaborator, in my opinion, with Crewe, because Crewe was like a paternal mainstay, been there, done that. But then Gaudio kind of grew into not being a great collaborator and doing the business end of it a lot. Which, look, it's not a put down; it's an observation.
Lee, what caused the problem was as the music changed, Gaudio couldn't change. Instead of being Gaudio, he tried to make the change. When during the period of time when he wrote that album,
Genuine Imitation Live Gazette.
He was trying to make the transition because of what was going on in the marketplace of these concept albums. So when we made that record, first of all, had he made the record with Crewe, it probably would have had the ingredient that was missing from it.
Yeah.
But what happened was whenever Gaudio was out there alone, he was there, and if he had the idea, great, he could do it. But if it wasn't there, and all that period of time that he had with the Four Seasons, he didn't have the songs.
Well, if you take Bob Crewe and Bob Gaudio, there's 2 separate things about them that you've highlighted there. Is that Bob Gaudio needed a lyricist, and Bob Crewe needed a tunesmith.
Yeah.
More than that, though. Bob Crewe made you feel like you were making a hit. No matter what you were doing, he could be mopping the floor. It was a hit mop. And when you were working with Gaudio, you were hoping he liked it the whole time. He didn't give you the satisfaction of great one, man. That's going to be killer. But Crewe was putting on a dress and dancing around and on the board.
Well,
and all that. You knew it was a hit. It didn't matter. You knew it. It felt like it.
This was interesting. After when I did Sweet Caroline for Neil, I walked into the control room and I said, "How was that, Neil?" Then he says, "Well, I didn't hear anything wrong with it." I left the studio. I said, "Man, boy," I said, "I'll never work for this guy again. He hated this record." I swear, I never heard from him. The record was, it's been like 50 years. I never got a phone call, not a card, not, "Hey, how's your kids?"
I don't hear anything wrong with it.
Right.
Oh God.
No, did you put Gaudio together with Neil Diamond?
That's right. Then nobody decides anything.
But what I must interject this. Gaudio was always like a deep thinking kind of dude. I went to England to record Charles Aznavour in 1977, and when we were about to land, Heathrow was closed, so we went to Holland. So they sent a limousine to pick me up in Holland to drive me back through the tunnel. So the limo driver, and I sat at the airport. He says, you know, this flight may go back to London, so why don't you wait a little while? So I start talking to the limo driver. So what do? You drive many celebrities? He said, yeah, last week I drove Neil Diamond. He said, and his producer, Bob somebody, Gaudio. He said, yeah. He said, what a strange pair. He says, I've never driven people around that didn't talk. They didn't even talk to one another.
No,
It's true. It's true. It's just
certainly I can echo that, because I've just spent nearly 5 years pulling together the whole anthology and wrote and sent all the stuff off to Bob Gaudio. He asked me to send him 29 tracks that he wanted to hear that were either unreleased or he couldn't remember, and he approved them all except 2. And one was a demo of the Beach Boys medley, the Beach Boys East Meets West. And
I remember that.
the reason why I didn't like it was because there was too much Beach Boys on it. He didn't say that, but he said it was an early demo and it wasn't very good. But when they finally came out, there were hardly any Beach Boys left on it. It was basically
To me, it shows a missing link in the evolution of us as human beings, because you're supposed to get to the point where you realize, oh, what's the difference? Put the things out. People will see what it used to be. It'll be a nice progression. I'm 82 years old. Life is great. I'm very wealthy. Run with it, baby. Go. You know, it's like if you invented the cure for cancer, you wouldn't sell it. You would give it away. So because that's what a human being does.
I will tell you one thing, because one of the questions that was on the list was, what was that was used on the beginning of Ronnie?
Yeah, what instrument was that?
Yeah.
What instrument was that?
Made
It was
that
it was a jawbone.
oh, what?
It was a jawbone of an ass, and the jawbone, if you hit it, it rattled.
Uh-huh.
And if you mic'd it correctly, you'll hear that.
Okay.
Those were the days when you actually had to discover a sound instead of call it up in a digital library and have 37 choices till you don't know what to use.
Well, yeah.
Somebody asked me, he says, what was that sound on Candy Girl, that gliss? And I said it was a Farfisa organ. And they says it can't be, because back then Farfisa didn't have. I said it was Gaudio's instrument, and he kept it at Stay Phillips, so I know it was there. And on Candy, he just went over to the keyboard and just went like this, and that was left on the record.
Yeah, it's an outstanding note.
So those sound effects back then were usually something organic.
Yeah. Well, now I'm using artificial intelligence, would you believe, to pull them out of the records. And wonder what the hell is this song? It's not a string. It's not. Anyway, I'll tell you more about that in the future, Charlie.
Are there any questions from the guys that are there that you would like to ask?
Well, yeah, there's a hand raised. Chuck Walker in West Coast.
Charlie, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Charlie, I remember back as a 17-year-old kid in January of 1964, this incredible sound hit the airwaves as I was driving down the street. It was an arrangement you put together called Dawn. To me, that's the best arrangement I've ever heard of any music, and to this day, that is my all-time favorite record. It has an incredible depth of field and vocals and a balance of instrumental, and you did it at the same time that you were working with Gaudio, and you had a couple of arrangements on a Kay Winding album, Montocon #2.
Right.
Did that have any influence on your arrangement for Dawn?
No. What the influence for Dawn actually came from Frankie Valli. Frank, I was on my way to Crewe's office one day, and Frankie was walking into the building. So he came up to the car, and I was at that point you could still park on a street. So I was parking right on 60th Street. Frankie came over to the car, and More, the record More, was playing. And Frankie, I opened down the window. Frankie started to tap on the roof. He says, "We need to put that rhythm on a record."
That's the way you have it listed in your book. Exactly.
Yeah. So it was no more complicated. I don't think that it had an influence other than we loved the feel of it. So when they played me Dawn, and this is crazy. We met at 7 o'clock at night for a session the next day with 5 songs. And so I had to write 5 arrangements overnight and record them the next day. And Dawn was one of them.
So you did more than you did more tracks at Philips, but at Atlantic, did you?
Yeah. Well, there were 5. We did Silence is Golden, I think, on that session too.
Yeah.
And there were a couple other songs. I don't remember the names of them.
Right. Okay. And Bob Crewe actually picked up the tapes from Atlantic the day Kennedy was assassinated, because I've got a photocopy of the page. And
I was at Atlantic that day too.
Yeah, and he picked up the multi-tracks from Atlantic, and by that time he'd signed to Philips. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Any other? There was a question Anthony had about open harmony, I think.
He's also, Chuck, you brought my RCA record up.
Yeah, hey, sometime you got to tell us about how you did this record. Sometime in the future.
Okay.
Not now, but sometime in the future.
Yeah. And Anthony, didn't you ask me about a quote Charlie had made about the thing about Made the Four Seasons originals? So unique.
Based on this open harmony, and not being a musician, I always wonder what exactly is open harmony, but that might be too technical a question.
Well, I could simplify it a different way. Anyway, the difference is I can use my fingers. It's the difference between having notes played like this, 4 notes being played like this, or 4 notes being played like this, where they're separated. So the intervals between the notes are greater, and they cover a 2-octave range instead of just a range of 5 notes.
Right.
You with us?
Yeah.
I have a less technical
Yeah.
talking about musical intros. How about the fuzz guitar on Let's Hang On? Is that just one guitar, or was that? It almost sounds like 2 superimposed on each other. I always wondered about that.
That guitar was the reason why it sounded like that is because it's a bass. It was a bass. They played a boom do go do go do dum, but with that also there was another line that the bass was playing. Boom, diggle, boo, boo, do, boom, boo, diggle, boo, boo, do. So you had the 2 lines playing the same time, so you would have identified them as 2 parts because they really were 2 parts. They just worked in arranging talk. They worked in contrary motion, so they did this.
Opposite attract. Yeah.
Right.
And it's one guitar. It's just one guitar.
One guitar.
A bass.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, but when the bass kicked in, Charlie wrote great bass parts because Charlie could play bass. And even things like swearing to God and those kind of things, Gordon Edwards did some interpreting. But I couldn't believe when I heard a dance record where the drums, everything was 4 on the floor back in those days. And swearing to God is boom, 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 just like ragdoll, don't, don't, don't. But the bass is don't, don't, don't. And the whole thing goes don't, da, don't. Those are just, but that's what happens. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I'm listening, they're soloing drums and bass, and I'm hearing don't, da. It was a band. It was fucking great.
So when you did Swearing to God and it goes 10 minutes and you've got all these different instruments playing all different parts, how the hell did you keep the structure to that without it just becoming wild?
Well, back during the disco days, the clubs wanted long versions of the records.
Yeah.
So what we did was we made the basic record, and then what we would do is we would make copies of different sections of it, and seeing that the way we recorded, the horns were done as an overdub, background voices were done as an overdub, the lead was done as an overdub, we would take the track and just copy the track, and then different sections, different things would happen. And
Yeah.
when I wrote the arrangement, I wrote the arrangement for the single.
Yeah.
And then Bob cut it and did various versions of it.
So it was a cut and paste in those days.
Yeah, they do the same thing today.
With other lyrics and other sections, and they would compose to it actually in some situations. All of those da 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 that Charlie was talking about earlier.
Well, it's not. It doesn't. I've checked the repeating, and the repeating is not total. It's not that there are original new sections at the end.
Right, that's right, Tony.
2 minutes.
Not to mention a phenomenal baritone sax solo. Oh my God!
But
Yeah.
but taking into consideration the fact that when we made the record, and the record was edited, I have the original score here someplace, and I could take a look. But if I remember correctly, I just wrote it as a regular record, because back then, if you made a 10-minute record with the horns, you had to pay the band like triple scale, and that was really not something that anybody wanted to do.
Yeah, not to mention just keeping the charts on the music stand.
Yeah. Well, it's an absolutely wonderful work of art, but
It is a work of art. It's a work of art.
The long disco version of it is actually lost because there's a tape flaw in it, and I have repaired the tape flaw, so that it is preserved. But the only place that it's preserved, it's not in the Four Seasons partnership. It's only us guys who've got it, and this is what we've done.
Yeah, but Gaudio's not a part of that, so it doesn't matter.
Well, it doesn't matter. We you know, he may own it, but we've got it. That's the story of this box set, really.
Good. That and 200 might get you, you know, a nice dinner in London.
Well, let me ask: are there any other questions that you want to find out?
I have a trivia question. Who is the singer on the opening song on the soundtrack of Who Killed Teddy Bear? Who is that singer?
How do you even know about that?
Oh, we know about everything. We know the story behind that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I don't remember. I know that I put Gaudio together with Al Cascia for them to write the songs.
Yeah, well, Al Cascia says it's a singer named Rita Dyson, who, of course, I never heard of, but he said that was the singer. You recall Rita Dyson? Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It was supposed to be V. Velasco. Who to record it, but apparently that never came off.
Well, you did a whole album with V. Velasco.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got that album on the computer here. Yeah.
I don't even remember that. I still have the photo that she took of me when I was 20. I was 25 years old. She took a picture that I still use. That was taken back then.
We're still collecting, and I still have tapes full of your material that Mike Miller and I researched during the 90s. And I've still got to get some of that onto YouTube and share it with you. Today, we've had a great honor of being able to talk to you. So I'll edit out the parts that didn't work, and I'll get it ready for issue on YouTube to all the fans who really love these sessions, and the fact that we get a chance to talk to people who were Four Seasons. But we didn't ask you about your shows as a Four Season, but it's in your book. So if anybody wants to know, they'll find it there. Okay, so I'll wind it up there, guys. So thanks a lot for your participation and involvement.
Charlie Calello.
We're back next week.
I love you, man.
We're back next week.
You began my career, Charlie Calello.
We're back next week with Lee Shapiro, and next Saturday we're going to talk every track of Who Loves You. Unfortunately, we've not got John Piver involved because he's poorly and still in hospital. So we'll cover the creation of that album with Lee and his memories of it. And so we'll be recording that next Saturday with the panel and going through each of those tracks and how they came about. So thanks, Charlie. Good luck with whatever you're doing at the moment, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll try to do a bit more about other aspects of your career and other stories behind the tracks.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting
Thank
me.
you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And thank you, Kenny, for caring about our career enough, even though we're the behind the scenes guys. You know, I'm glad to see that fans and followers care about us. It's great. Take care, everybody.
Thanks very
Have a
much.
great day.
Be
Be
safe.
happy. Be happy.